The moment they walked away, it looked like they had already won. But what you were witnessing was only the opening scene, not the ending. You still remember how it felt. The ground shifted, the air changed. Something that once felt permanent suddenly became a wound you carried everywhere you went. And the cruelest part? They did not seem to feel it at all. They carried on. New plans, new smiles, new photos, a whole life that seemed to say, you never really mattered that much. And so you are left asking the question that no one can actually answer. Does any of this ever balance out? Here is what most people miss. Accountability rarely announces itself. It does not arrive at your door with a warning. It does not follow a schedule you can track. But it does move, quietly beneath the surface, shifting things they cannot explain and cannot undo. There are three distinct patterns that begin to emerge when someone who hurt you starts experiencing the weight of what they chose to do. Not because you cursed them, not because the universe works on your timeline, but because choices leave marks, and eventually those marks become visible. Stay with me, because what is coming might completely change the way you see your own healing. Sign 1. Their version of happiness stops holding up under pressure. Right after they walked away, something confusing happened. They looked fine, better than fine. Their life seemed to expand while yours felt like it was contracting. You saw evidence, real or imagined, that they were thriving, and that evidence was painful. But ask yourself this quietly. Why does someone who is genuinely at peace feel the constant need to broadcast it? Authentic contentment is quiet. It does not need validation. It does not perform for an audience or press itself into other people's awareness. When someone is consistently loud about how well they are doing after hurting another person, look closely, because volume is often the direct opposite of peace. As time moves forward, something begins to shift inside them, not externally, internally. At night, when the noise stops and distractions lose their power, stillness becomes their problem. They lie there and the mind begins pulling up images, not arguments, not scenes of conflict, but gentler and softer memories. The time you stayed calm when they lost theirs. The moment you forgave them without making them feel diminished. The patience you extended that they never once properly acknowledged. Genuine peace does not perform for anyone. It simply exists on its own. And suddenly the life they chose feels thinner than they expected. The connections around them feel less stable. The laughter does not reach the same depth. The new people in their world do not understand them the way you did. Not because those people are lesser, but because that kind of understanding takes years to carefully build, and they discarded the version they already had. That is when a quiet discomfort settles into them, not as punishment, but as contrast. They start measuring their current reality against something they cannot quite name, something that felt more real than what surrounds them now. And that internal comparison? That is precisely where accountability begins. Not loudly, not dramatically, but accurately. Sign 2. The world starts reflecting their own behavior directly back at them. Life has a way of creating symmetry that no one deliberately arranges. The person who once made you feel uncertain about where you stood slowly starts feeling uncertain about exactly where they stand. They step into something new, a new connection, a new dynamic, a different version of what they imagined wanting. And at first, it feels like freedom, but cracks form. Subtle at first, then harder to ignore. They start reading people's tones very carefully. They start wondering why responses feel distant. They start overthinking messages that go unanswered for too long. Does any of that feel familiar? Because it should. Because it is precisely what you silently experienced while they were doing it to you. This is not coincidence. It is consequence. Behavior leaves a fingerprint, and the pattern of who someone truly is eventually circles back through every single relationship they enter. They start to encounter emotional distance. They feel dismissed. They feel easily replaceable. They feel like the effort they are putting in is not matched by what they receive. And in those moments, in the quiet of their own frustration, a memory surfaces. You. The conversations you tried to have, the boundaries you tried to hold, the softly spoken words, "This is hurting me." They understand those words now, not because someone sat them down and explained it carefully, but because they are feeling it from the inside. What you once carried in silence, they are now learning through lived experience. And awareness that arrives late carries a different kind of weight. Because now there is no pretending they did not know better. They begin recognizing things that cannot be unseen, that loyalty is not everywhere, that emotional safety is not automatically available, that someone who genuinely sees you and still chooses to stay is not something you encounter twice. And in a moment they did not prepare for, a thought arrives completely uninvited. What I had was real, and I treated it carelessly. That thought does not vanish quickly. It lingers, it returns, it settles into the spaces between everything else. Some nights it arrives as a restlessness they cannot explain. Some mornings it surfaces as a vague awareness that something has shifted permanently in ways they are only beginning to measure. That is the second sign that accountability has quietly arrived. Sign 3. Your absence transforms from something that felt like relief into something they were unprepared for. When you went quiet, they interpreted it as freedom. No more difficult conversations. No more accountability. No more mirrors showing them who they were slowly becoming. They believed your silence was a weight being lifted from their life. What they misunderstood was this: absence changes shape. In the beginning, it feels like open space, uncomplicated, easy, a welcome breath of fresh air. But space, when there is nothing truly meaningful to fill it, eventually becomes emptiness. One evening, without intention, they reach for their phone. Maybe a song played. Maybe they passed somewhere that held a memory. Maybe the night just settled in a certain way and instinct moved before thought could stop it. And then it lands. There is no version of you to reach anymore. The steady presence they took for granted is not waiting somewhere nearby. The emotional home they never realized they were living in is now permanently closed. And this is where regret stops being an abstract idea and becomes something they feel in their body. They begin to understand what you were, not perfect, not without flaws, but consistent. You showed up, you forgave, you stayed when walking away would have been significantly easier. You offered something that cannot be manufactured or simply replaced, someone who saw them clearly and chose to remain. Every new person they encounter now feels uncertain by comparison. Everything feels temporary. Nothing carries the same depth of weight. They may never say this aloud. Pride has a way of keeping the most important truths silent, but internally they measure. They compare, and the measurement never lands in their favor, because the real lesson accountability delivers is not destruction. It is not collapse. It is clarity. The specific, unavoidable clarity of understanding exactly what you walked away from at the precise moment it becomes impossible to return. Your absence does not follow them as revenge. It follows them as a quiet reminder that sincere love, offered steadily and consistently, cannot be dismissed without lasting cost. So here is what all of this means for you. We often picture accountability arriving dramatically. We imagine visible consequences, public acknowledgement, a clear moment where the balance obviously shifts in our direction. but the deepest consequences remain invisible to everyone except the person quietly experiencing them. What they lost was not only you, they lost someone who would have built something lasting with them, someone who was patient through difficulty, steady through confusion, loyal when they had every reason not to be. And while they sit with that understanding in rooms you will never see, you are doing something they no longer can. You are healing, you are moving forward, you are learning that choosing your own peace is not weakness. It is the clearest, most grounded form of self-respect available to you. You do not need to witness their regret to validate your own worth. You do not need to see their consequences to know that what you offered was real and rare. See, if this connected with something you have been quietly carrying, let this be a moment of release. You were not the one who got away with something. You were the one who truly showed up with everything, not because you handled all of it perfectly, not because healing is simple or moves in a straight line, but because the moment you chose not to answer betrayal with bitterness, you stepped into a version of yourself worth becoming. If this video resonated with you, I take a moment to like it and follow PsycheVision, because every single week we explore the psychology behind the moments that permanently shape who we become. And if you have chosen peace over bitterness after someone betrayed you, leave one single word in the comments below: free. Because that is exactly what you are.